Thank you so much. I'm Chris Knopp, the Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, and I am so excited that we have Bryan Hansel here as our special guest. First, a little bit about Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness here. We are the premier organization for protecting the boundary waters, but we're more than just protecting the boundary waters. We're really about people, and all of you are the essential foundation for our success as an organization. As you know, last week we had a great victory before the Minnesota Supreme Court in stopping the proposed polymet sulfide mine. But our work also includes connecting people to the boundary waters. Right now we have 40 students out on trail on wilderness canoe trips into the boundary waters, and this season we'll have 120 students on wilderness canoe trips and reach another 3,000 or more students through our other No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters educational programs. And we also believe in community, and through our office in downtown Ely, we are connecting with community members all across the communities that are gateways to the boundary waters. And our Ely community coordinator right now is up on the Gunflint Trail right now, meeting with people and outfitters and having important conversations about how we build and support the communities that are gateways to the boundary waters. The connection between art and nature is really fundamental. Through art we can express emotions that are much deeper and much more fundamental than a nice headline in a newspaper or a Supreme Court decision or a court pleading that we have. And nature, that emotional connection in art is the more powerful advocacy tool. And when I think of Bryan Hansel here, his work connects so deeply. Bryan has more than 3 decades of experience in nature photography. It is a love of photography that began when he was in high school. His work has appeared in National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and many other publications. He provides outdoor workshops for those of you that are photography enthusiasts, and one-on-one lessons as well. Bryan is a lover of the outdoors, and he expresses his love of the outdoors through his photography. Today, Bryan is going to talk about a particular expedition that happened, the Winchell expedition, and use that as he retraces that expedition. It'll lead to broader questions about art and photography, about our history and connection to the land, and so it's really a great platform for all these important issues. And for all of you that are participating here, and we have so many of you, you can put your questions in the Q&A tab at the very bottom of your screen, or in the chat function. And this is sort of an iterative process. So Bryan will present for about 40 minutes or so, and we'll have a Q&A session that follows that. I am so grateful for all of you that are on the line here. If you want to drop in a chat letting us know where you're from or a little bit about you. We often have people from several states and sometimes overseas here, and let us know a little bit about you. This will be a group experience here. So I'm going to turn this over to Bryan here. And thank you again, Bryan, for all that you do through your art. And take it away, Bryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to get the slideshow up here, and just give me a second. And the slideshow has a little bit of sound in there, so I got to push an extra button. And all right, we should be ready to go. So Chris, did you want to cover your upcoming events now, or you want to?
Sure, I'll do a quick summary of these. So we really want to connect with all of you that are out there. Here are some in-person ways to connect. Tonight we are having in Minneapolis at Midwest Mountaineering we are raffling off a canoe, and it's part of a customer appreciation night at Midwest Mountaineering. It's a great time, just a great experience to be at Midwest Mountaineering. If you have not gotten one of those canoe raffles, you can do that through by contacting us through our website or in person at Midwest Mountaineering, or you could call us. My phone number is 651-999-9565. Again, 651-999-9565. And after the program here, I can get your information if you'd like that. On the ground here, we have a super hike that's taking place from 11 to 2 o'clock. It's the Greenwood Fire hike, off of Route 1 and Route 2 where they intersect. So over 24,000 acres burned in 2021. So this hike will really take an interesting look at that. So you can sign up on our website, or you could give me a call if you're interested in participating in that. And then finally, back in the Twin Cities, we have a bike, the Grand Portage bike tour that we're having on Saturday, August 9th here. So there are 2 routes, a longer and shorter one. Go to our website, sign up for that, or give me a call if you have issues with that. So we really want to connect with you. You're the foundation of our success, and we're trying to create this community of people that love the Boundary Waters, and coming together is a way of creating that community. So Bryan, there's for the infomercial. Now back to you there, Bryan.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. So I think the introduction that you did was pretty good, but I'll just do a short introduction of myself again. So my name is Bryan Hansel. I'm an outdoor photographer and outdoor photography educator. I live up in Grand Marais, Minnesota, on the edge of the Boundary Waters. And one of the reasons that we live here is because of the Boundary Waters. And if you want to learn more about my work, you can go to bryanhansel.com. And then if you're into paddling, which I assume most of us are, I do blog about paddling at paddlinglight.com. So that's my shameless self-promo there. So let's get on with this trip. So I called this trip the Following the Winchell Expedition trip. So I always like to give the overview of the trips first to get these questions out of the way. So I took this trip back in 2021 in May, right before the bugs started. 12 days total is what it took me, and then my objective was just to try to follow as closely as possible of the 1879 route that state geologist Newton Horace Winchell took, and then I wanted to find and climb Malman Peak. So Malman was a member of the expedition. He climbed a peak and they named it after him. So I wanted to find that peak as well. So here's the stats. It was approximately 160 miles long. I stopped counting the portage totals after about 30 miles of portaging. And then I had to get 3 different Boundary Water entry permits for this trip, just because it was a complicated trip. And it happened on my birthday. So, and I happened to be getting a permit on the day of my birthday. So my wife joined me and we consumed a birthday cake together. I'm going to play a little video here. I call this kind of the trailer of the expedition. My original plan was to shoot a personal documentary and put it out there, a non-commercial documentary. And I found out that I just didn't have enough footage to pull it off, but I put together kind of a fun trailer. And this is, here's the trailer.
So an adventure is a trip where something goes wrong. A trip is somewhere that you've traveled. Sightseeing is when you're traveling somewhere just to see the sights. An expedition is where there's a purpose behind a trip. I'm Bryan Hansel. I'm heading out on a trip following a route from 1879. So the state geologist Winchell had come to Grand Marais and paddled inland up to the inland lakes, which are now the Boundary Waters, across and then down to Lutzen at the mouth of the Poplar River. So he was surveying the area for any geological finds, primarily minerals. So this is one of several trips that he made up here. And on this trip they left Grand Marais and ended up down at Lutzen. All the things that we're told are going to be a bad idea, and we do anyways. Although nobody told me this would be a bad idea. They're all like, hey Bryan, that sounds great. Yeah, you should do that. love the smell today. Wet cedar, wet spruce. Class mud. At least it's not muddy. Yeah, not on a solo trip, no freaking way. That was the gully that I just tried to ascend and then had to descend it. It took me 10 minutes not to go very far. A round trip, 10 minutes. Yep, I don't think that this is doable, so. Found it! Woo! Awesome! Oh, so cool. We are at the summit peak of Malmen Peak here. This is so cool. For me, after getting to Malmen Peak, it was, yeah, you achieved my goal. I got off the mountain, and the rest is just getting back to civilization, you know, the hike down from base camp kind of thing, if you want to use a mountaineering analogy. When he gets to Superior, that's it for, you know, this section of this trip. It's time to head home. For him, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. For me, Grand Marais.
Yeah, I think that that video does a really good job of explaining the trip overall and seeing some of the sights that I saw on there, but it's not the entire story. So the story of this trip actually begins in 1858 in Minneapolis. So Minneapolis is admitted to the Union as the 32nd state, and as the state starts to grow and iron mining begins in northern Minnesota, the state decides they need a complete geological survey. So they end up hiring this guy, Newton Horace Winchell, which, you know, Newton Horace, what a great name. But he also has a great beard, as you can see here. So of course he was going to be our first state geologist. He was also the first director of the Geological and Natural History Survey of Minnesota, and he served in those positions until 1900. He produced 24 total annual reports, and you could just go down his list of achievements, and he's no slacker at all. Like, this guy was like a total overachiever. He joined Custer in the Black Hills to produce the first geological map of the Black Hills. He founded a magazine called the American Geologist and served as the editor. He founded the Geological Society of America and served as the president. He organized the Minnesota Academy of Natural Sciences. He lectured, he taught, spent a lot of time in the field. I sort of think about Winchell as the Indiana Jones of Minnesota. So he's a geologist instead of an archaeologist, but he's going on these grand adventures all over the state just to survey it and learn what he can learn about the area. If you're really interested in more about Winchell, I can highly recommend this book by Sue Leaf, so Minnesota's geologist. Sue actually helped me figure out the route that he took on this trip. So she was very instrumental in figuring that route out. So Winchell ended up taking two trips to the North Shore in Minnesota. And the first one is in 1878, and he started in Grand Portage, and he heads over to the Iron Range and then eventually back to Minnesota. And the canoe that you can barely see out of the photo here, or this is the canoe that he took on that adventure. And supposedly this is still in possession at the university somewhere. And then in 1879, he heads back up, and this is the trip that I followed. He started in Grand Marais, went inland, and then came out at the mouth of the Poplar River, where Lutzen Resort is at this time. So it was a little bit difficult recreating this route. So the first thing I got is this map sort of landed in my lap. So a friend of mine showed me this map that he had found in one of the back of the geological reports that Winchell had done. And it showed the route that he took up from Grand Marais through the Boundary Waters and then back down the old Ojibwe canoe route to the mouth of the Poplar River. And I was like, well, how can I figure out this exact route? Because as you can imagine, a map produced back then, one of the first maps produced back then, it wasn't 100% accurate. And some of the place names had changed from the lakes that the lake names that we use now versus what was used back then. So I couldn't figure it out 100% off the map. So I turned to one of his survey reports, and the survey report actually gave me exactly what I needed to know. So luckily he's gathering these survey samples, so rocks. He's basically chipping some rocks off, throw them in a bag, and then he's labeling them, and he's doing it in the order of the direction that he went. So as you can see there, he goes from Poplar Lake, coming from Little Lake to Hungry Jack, Duncan and Mud Lake. He references the stair portage. So the stairs were there in 1879 when he did this. And that's how I got the route. Now, this still didn't solve all the problems, because even though I had the route, there were a lot of portages missing. So what I ended up doing is finding, working with Ryan at the University of Minnesota Map Library. And what he helped me do is find these old maps of Cook County, so we could see, so I could look at it and see what kind of portages were available on those maps. So if we look at this one, you can see from Pine Lake up to Bower Trout, there's these little dotted lines. So I'll kind of zoom out here just because I can't label it, but there's these little dotted lines right here. So these were the original portages, and they were still shown on maps in 1917. So I had some of these map portages, or some of these portages shown in 1917, and some of these are gone. Like this one's gone now, it doesn't exist, and this one to here is gone. Then the other thing, when I wasn't 100% positive of where the portages were, the early aerial surveys actually showed when portages were still available and in use. So this is Christine Lake now, and this is White Pine is what it's called now. And if we look in there, we can actually see from the aerial view that there is a portage trail that kind of runs right here. And then we look down here and you can see that there's this trail that comes off of Christine, and that's also the original portage. This was the original portage that he took, and now it's on private property and it's closed off. Then one other thing that I used here is I went to Trigg's 1966 maps, and now what he was doing is he was mapping the Boundary Waters area and the whole Superior National Forest to show what it would have been like during the treaties, so that they could document what was available back then and what should be available now. Or and he consolidated all of these historic things. So here we can see where he says canoe route from Lake Superior and Poplar River to the Knife Lake, passes through Michigami Lake. And then you can see over here, he has the Paulson mine. So he has all the stuff that was available so that they could determine kind of the value of the land at the time of the treaties as he was putting that together. These are still available directly from Trigg's offices in Ely. And they're, if you're Boundary Waters aficionado, you should probably own these because they're amazing. And then the other thing that I turned to are some of the original plat maps. So this area was primarily surveyed in 1879 timeline, and some of these surveys are very, very good. So on this particular one, this is one of the better ones. You can actually see coming off of the lake right here, which I think is Marshall, up to Bower Trout. We can see that there's a portage that's surveyed, and this actually, the beginning of this portage trail still exists, and then the rest of it doesn't. I wish the Forest Service would reopen this, because this would make a really nice route possibility for some loops in the area that don't exist right now. But the beginning of this, I found this, and it's actually, you can tell it was a portage, and then it just peters out. Now, once I had all that, I plotted it on a Google Earth map, and that's what's over here. And you'll see my little notes, you know, portage is on the road. Winchell seems to put it in here, and Ariel puts it elsewhere. But these are just my kind of operational notes to try to figure out what I was missing and what I needed to find. And then next to it, this is my actual GPS track of the route. So I was using an inReach that tracked the whole way. And when we overlay them, you can see how close I was. There were some significant variations, just because I didn't want to do a lot of the bushwhacks where things didn't exist. And in some areas like this area, the Superior Hiking Trail sort of paralleled where I thought the original one was. So I just followed that instead. And then there's a big detour up here just because of I couldn't do a portage, it was just too dense, so I had to do this massive detour around it. But that's kind of how I put together the route. It took me maybe 4 or 5 months to gather all the information that I needed to do to get the route as close as I could possibly do it. And then it was time to start the trip. So I always like to do a before picture when I start the trip. And if we look at the canoe, you can just see how nice, shiny, and scratch-free that is. That's the last time it's going to be in that state when you see it. And so this is in the Grand Marais Harbor. Very early in the morning, because I knew I had a big significant portage to do on that first day. And here's what that first portage kind of looked like. So this is a power line. And here's hooking up with the Superior Hiking Trail. And then this is called Meridian Road. And finally, my first bit of water was on Devil Track Lake. Now, the entire shore that you're looking at is the north shore of Devil Track Lake, and that's primarily private now. So somehow I had to get permission, and I happen to have a friend that lives almost exactly where I think the old portage was. So I was able to portage over there, but I didn't want to follow the old portage because it actually, as far as I can tell, it goes right through the center of the Grand Marais Airport runway. So that was something that I didn't want to risk. So I took the long way around and went down a road and eventually hooked up with a river that's called the Junco River, which is one of my favorite rivers to paddle outside the Boundary Waters. And the total portage amount for that day was about 10 miles of portaging. And this is one of the weird things is because of the way that they issue permits, you can't get them 2 days ahead of time. You have to get them the day that you're going to enter, a max a day before you're going to enter the Boundary Waters. So I actually was picked up by my kids. And so this is my kid over on the left there. My wife and kid came up and picked me up to take me into town so that I could get a permit to continue on to the trip. So once I had that permit and I was back on from Devil Track, I paddled down the Junco River, and then I had to do a significant portage. And I don't know if you can see in this photo over here, it's like one of those find the Waldo things. Can anybody see my canoe in there? That's essentially the entire 3-mile portage I had to do. It looked a lot like that. But I was able to do that portage, and this is my first official campsite on the trip, which is on West Twin Lake, which is a canoe route outside of the Boundary Waters, so you don't need reservations for this area. And this is what Junco River looks like. It's one of those really narrow rivers. It's shallow. There's a lot of fish in it. It's a really nice paddle outside of the Boundary Waters. So the first day, when you look at it, here's the trip. So Grand Marais would be down to here. I have this massive bushwhack to get up to this small lake, which I believe is called Track Lake. And then I was able to hook up onto a Forest Service road and found this logging road that went up into this area. And I thought that this was going to be completely open because on the satellite imagery, it looks like it's freshly logged and there's no trees growing up in there. Well, unbeknownst to me is I didn't look at the age of the satellite map. So when I got there, it was really dense, and it was so dense that I didn't actually video any of this. But I do have a video of what I look like coming off of that section.
All right, I'm on Pine Lake after a couple of bushwhacks. So bushwhack from Junco to track to Pine, and that was interesting experience. At times it was not carrying the canoe, it was dragging the canoe through the woods. And it's just wet, rainy. I don't know, it was, not that great, but not that bad. It was kind of, I guess, fun in some distorted, weird version of fun. Enjoyable at points. Some areas of the forest were pretty open. A few logging areas, I hit a road. I wanted to videotape it, but it was just too tired to do that, so he didn't get to see it. I'll get some more tomorrow.
So that was my first experience with trying to stay on the portage trails as closely as I could, and it took significantly longer than what I thought it was going to do. But that got me to day 3, and then day 3 is when I went into the Boundary Waters. But this is my first portage. It was a 4-mile road walk from West Twin Lake up to my entry point on bower trout. And kind of the interesting thing on bower trout is, so here's my first Boundary Waters view. It was foggy, which I actually like. So this rock kind of captured my attention because it was also the first lake in the Boundary Waters on the trip, and it took me only a couple days to get there. And then this is my first campsite in the Boundary Waters, and that's actually on Brule Lake, which wasn't on Winchell's route. And the reason that I went to Brule Lake is because here's the portage that I was originally going to take from Marshall Lake to Little Trout Lake. And well, you can just see how dense it was, and I just didn't know how I was going to be able to get a canoe through this section. It just seemed nearly impossible. And
yeah, I don't know about getting a canoe through here. Pretty tight. Pretty not possible, probably.
so as you can see, like, can you imagine getting a canoe through stuff like this? I'd actually, later in the trip, I learned how difficult it was, but at this time, I just imagined how difficult it was going to be. So when we look at the map, you see that the yellow is Winchell's route. And I ended up going about, I think it was 16 miles out of my way over to Brule. I camped on Brule. And then I went up to Winchell Lake, which is named after Winchell. But all the evidence shows that he probably never stepped onto it. So at this point, he references an Ojibwe canoe route that goes this way down to the Poplar River. So we know that there was a canoe route coming this way to the Poplar River and a canoe route going this way to the Poplar River, both Ojibwe canoe routes. So he references that canoe route, but as far as the evidence shows, he never stepped on the lake that's named after him. And the reason I did that is this portage is gone now. So that lasted up until I think it was 1930 was the last map that I found it on, and then it disappeared. But it would open up a really interesting possibility for loop if the Forest Service ever reopened that one. So the next day, actually had a fantastic campsite. So one of the interesting things with the permits, I should mention this, one of the interesting things of permits is the easier way for me would have been to go back out here, go up to Ram Lake, get back in on Ram Lake, and then head north, except I only had a permit for bower trout. So technically I couldn't leave the Boundary Waters, come in on this other entry point, and then continue on my trip. So that's why I had to do the detour. So that was kind of an interesting experience. In retrospect, if I were to retrace this route again, I would actually just get the permit for Ram, because bower trout, there's just that portage just isn't doable anymore unless you really are into bushwhacking. But after that detour, this is my first camp. I got there at noon, and I could have gone on, but I decided just to stop. And if I remember right, this campsite is affectionately known as Butt Crack Campsite. If I remember, that's kind of the slang name for it. And this is the first good sunset. I wish there would have been more clouds, but I thought it was pretty anyways. I liked how the trees just aligned for the view there. So the next day, I have to leave the Boundary Waters. And then I have to re-enter the Boundary Waters again. And this is kind of an interesting one, is the re-entering at Duncan Daniels area. I didn't have a overnight permit for that. So I had to do this in a day. So I had to get from Hungry Jack Lake all the way over to Gunflint on a day permit, because the Gunflint's outside of the Boundary Waters, Hungry Jack's outside of the Boundary Waters, so I could do this big trip without having an overnight permit. And I was hoping to get pancakes at Trail Center, but instead they weren't open yet when I arrived. So I just decided to fuel up at the gas station there. It just wasn't quite as good as blueberry pancakes in the morning. But also the cool thing, I think, when you're on a solo trip, for me at least, about day 5 is when everything starts kicking in. I start to get the hang of things. The routine's perfect. I'm getting away from all of that workaday life, and things are really kicking in. So this day 5 is going to be a 20-mile day, and I get to pass one of the most prettiest waterfalls on the Stairway Portage in the Boundary Waters. And it looks, I get one of those kind of really nice fair weather cumulus clouds. And the only difficulty on this day was that it was really hot. So it was about 90 degrees, which is pretty rare for May. Here's on the border, if you've never portaged or paddled along the border, these are the border markers. That this one is from South Lake to North Lake, I believe. So you have Canada on one side over here and the United States on the other, and they mark it with these kind of survey markers. So despite being a beautiful day, I started to notice that the storm system was blowing in after all that fair weather cumulus, and the temperature dropped significantly. So it had been 90 degrees. I was completely sweating, and it dropped about down to 60 degrees just as this storm front came in. And as that storm front came in, it was just crazy. It was like windy, maybe 40 mile per hour, 50 mile per hour winds, lightning everywhere. I was in my tent leaning up against the wall of the tent, otherwise it was going to collapse. And then I was trying to stand on just the heel, or just on my feet, so I'd have as limited amount of contact as possible with the ground, because lightning was striking everywhere. And that night it actually got down below freezing. So it dropped from 90 degrees down to about 30 or 29 degrees as that night went on. So the next morning I woke up, and it happens to be my birthday, and I need to get a new permit to go into the boundary waters again. So this is the permit number 3 for the boundary waters, but I had never stopped. So I paddled past this spot many times, and this is called Bridal Veil Falls, but I'd never stopped. So I figured an early morning birthday treat would be stop at a waterfall, and I love to photograph waterfalls. I designed a filter with Stingray filters just specifically to photograph waterfalls. It's called the Stingray Bryan Hansel waterfall polarizer. So I figured I'd treat myself for my birthday and go photograph Bridal Veil Falls. And it's a very pretty waterfall, as you can see in it. And all the rain from the night before, it was just gushing like crazy. So I took multiple different angles from it. And this was my favorite. It made the front of one of my waterfall calendar that I did in 2021. And this section doesn't flow all the time for Bridal Veil. It's just because it was so wet and so much rain had flown. It was like a raging river. So that was very beautiful to be able to see that as well. So when I was going to pick up my permit, I ran into my wife and my kids. So here they are. There's my birthday photo. I could not get them to have serious faces in my birthday photo. And here it is. And it was my 50th birthday. So it was a big one. And it was a great day. We ate the cake. A friend of mine had set up some smoked fish and some other delicious stuff that we ate. Warmed up in the car, and then got my permit, and then headed back into the boundary waters. And I got to my campsite, which was like the quintessential boundary waters campsite with the Canadian shield granite on the front. And I'm walking back to see where the privy was, and I ran into this nice big grouping of pink lady slippers. I love to photograph pink lady slippers, so I figured out a way to do it. I must have spent about an hour photographing this. One thing about photography and nature is you can spend a lot of time getting to know things with your camera, so it's easy to spend a lot of time. So that puts me about right here. So I'm in the boundary waters now. I have portage trails, and my focus starts to shift to trying to find some locations that Winchell visited that I can verify that he visited. And I'm coming out of the river, which is the Grand River, onto Seg. He notes that he stopped at the island immediately at that point and took a sample. Well, I knew what island he was talking about, and it was this one right here. So I stopped on the island and I looked around, and I found this kind of rock, which is what he was describing in his journals. And I did find a survey pin. Now, this isn't one left by Winchell, but people look for these. It's like a hobby of people to look for these. And I did try to find this on all the hobbyist sites, and it's not listed anywhere. So at some point, this was probably a survey pin when they were trying to figure out the border between Canada and the US. A Canadian team actually surveyed it. But I did look around at the rocks and can imagine, that Winchell was, he described this kind of bluish rock. And you can imagine that maybe this is a leftover chip from where he smashed the rock here. So it's hard to say, when you're looking at that stuff, but it certainly could have been. And my mindset starts to shift a little bit at this point. So I'm starting to look at these rocks, and I'm reading his journals, and he's really into rocks and these samples. So I'm starting to see stuff a lot more. So as I paddle throughout the day, I ended up on Jasper Lake. And when he's on Jasper Lake, he talks about how green the rock is. And I've never noticed that before. So I've been on Jasper before, and I've never paid attention to the color of the rock, but it is really green. It is surprisingly green. And I would have never been able to see that had I not been reading Winchell or had brought along his book. So that was a really interesting new perspective that I gained about the Boundary Waters. So also on that day, I did take this photo during the middle of the day that ended up on Minnesota's Monthly's front cover. So that was really fun to have that picture show up there. And then the next day is one where I'm heading over to Keck, and this is where Malman Peak is at. So Malman Peak on Keck, I wasn't sure how to get to it. So directly south of it, there's a campsite. And what I figured I would do is I would stop at the campsite, set up camp, and then I would bushwhack due north to get up to the top of Malman Peak. Well, when I got there, somebody already had the campsite. It was like 10 in the morning when I got there. But I asked him if I could just leave my canoe and then head north, and then I'd come back and get it later. And as I headed north, I got cliffed out. So there's a cliff band that runs right across this edge down into the swamp. And then I could see that there was a massive cliff face over here that I didn't think I was going to get up. I didn't take a picture of it. I should have, but it looked just like this. And I did not think that I was going to be able to get up that safely. So I paddled down the shore, parked the canoe kind of just a little bit west of that campsite. And then the video that I show in the beginning where it says that I had to turn around and I showed climbing, that was this section. I had to climb up over here somewhere and I couldn't get up. But eventually I looked around and I found a spot that I was able to climb up, and I got a fantastic view from this point, and then managed to bushwhack following a ridge line over to this area. And instead of following that down, I just kind of I took a risk and decided to follow this cliff edge down. Luckily I didn't get cliffed out, and it was faster to get down than up. But here's that video of what I had to go up. So this is what happened on that portage. You can see.
Class 4 scramble, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was probably something that you don't want to do, and I don't know that I would do it again. But this view was worth it to me to do it at least that one time. And I doubt that very many people get to that viewpoint. And here's what the beginning of the woods looked like. At first I was thinking this would be a cakewalk. And then it switched over to this. So this is in a burned area, and this is fresh growth. And this is one of the best views I've ever had in the Boundary Waters. That's looking north into Canada at this point. So now we're looking west. I had come from this point, and this is the bottom.
That was a bushwhack, all right. I'm so glad to be done with the bushwhack. It was really cool though. Glad I did it. Oh man, I gotta get some water.
And that's after after that bushwhack and finding Malman Peak. So that was quite the adventure. So here's the first view that I had off of finding Malman Peak. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Very, very risky to get there. When I got to the top of Malman Peak, I found this rock cairn, and inside of the rock cairn there was a pin. And this pin is part of a survey that they did for the border. And I found some other interesting things up here. So here's the official marker was underneath this pile of rocks. But there were also a couple of 16 penny nails from a tower that they would have had to have built up there to do the survey. And here's the official survey marker for that survey. I think it was 1916, and this is the Canadian, I forget what that stands for, but the surveying that they did, the organization that did the original surveying up there from Canada. So, and that was done in 1916. Now, the interesting thing is when I found this, it was already disturbed. So this area was actually cleaned out and disturbed. So somebody else had been up there recently, you know, I don't know, maybe within the last 5-6 years for sure, because the moss was kind of not on some of these rocks anymore, and you can definitely tell that it was disturbed. So that was interesting. And then there's my campsite, you know, just your typical kind of fun Boundary Waters campsite. And that puts me about right here after that day. So that was all the way from Jasper up to Malmin. And then I was going to stay on Keck, but the winds had kicked up and I ran into a party right at the portage who was coming across, and they had some young paddlers that had never paddled before, and there was no way they were going to get across the lake in the waves that they were going to face. So I let them have the campsite right here at the eastern side of Keck, and I just went through the Keck ponds until I found a nice campsite. So yeah. So the next couple days are really kind of your typical Boundary Waters paddle portage camp. So because we're right in the heart of the Boundary Waters, so it just felt like a normal Boundary Waters trip. And all the portages that exist now were portages that he would have done. So these are historic portage routes that were Ojibwe portages before they were before we used them in the Boundary Waters. And one of the interesting things that I found is, if anybody's bear bagged before, you know how difficult it can be to find the perfect bear bag tree. Well, I found one. So here's your perfect bear bag tree. You could get the bear bag way out there, but it was also the only spot that was the perfect spot for a tent. So I left my tent on the bear bag spot and bear bagged on an ideal tree, but you can see they don't make many trees like that in the Boundary Waters. And I didn't do very many selfies on this trip, but here's a selfie of me on that day. And you'll notice I'm wearing all my clothing because although it was hot in the earlier part of trips, it got up to that 90 degrees. At this time, the mornings are below freezing and the days are getting up to 40. So it was quite the experience at the end of the May. You never know what you're going to get. But we had beautiful frost on the plants in the morning. And the nice thing about that time of year, when it gets that cold, is you get this cool steam coming off the lakes in the morning. So I had these beautiful sunrises. So I'm just continuing to paddle down, and now I'm getting towards Sawbill Lake. And if you've ever been on Sawbill Lake, maybe you know about the famous Viking dolmen. So the legend told to me by somebody that worked at Sawbill is that this was created by Vikings to mark a nearby copper mine. Now, I don't know, they say that there's Viking runes on the backside that you can read. I couldn't find any, but I don't know about that legend, but there it is. If you're into Viking history in Minnesota, this is supposed to be a Viking spot. And that was, so that day is the day that I left the Boundary Waters as well. And I ended up going to Crescent Lake, which is this beautiful lake outside of the Boundary Waters. It's one of my favorite lakes I shouldn't spill the beans, but it's one of my favorite campgrounds outside of the Boundary Waters to stay at, just because the lake is just absolutely gorgeous. It's very dark skies there. And I stayed on an island campsite, and that's the difference. So when you go outside of the Boundary Waters, you no longer have those grills. You just have giant piles for your fire area. But we had the moon setting, and this is looking at the belt of Venus. The belt of Venus is this pink and blue glow at sunset and sunrise that happens opposite of the sunrise or the sunset. So at that point, I'm outside. I'm right there at Crescent Lake, and you'll see that the route goes down through a series of lakes to Rice Lake. This section. These are the last remaining portages that are maintained from the Ojibwe canoe route that are outside of the Boundary Water. So they're in fairly decent shape still. And then you get to Rice Lake, and then from Rice Lake, this is a really nice lake as well. It's hard to get into. Then I had to do this portage over to White Pine Lake. And from there, then I would hook into the Poplar River. So here's what that portage looked like from Rice Lake to White Pine Lake. And this is just a long day of portages for me. And every time I watch this, even though I did it, every time I watch this, I cringe a little bit at the sound of the Kevlar canoe.
The bushwhack is into white pine is done. I honestly don't think I've ever been happier to see a lake with some dense bushwhacking. I put everything away. I couldn't have a camera out because it was just gonna get ripped right out of my hand. And yeah, I'm here. That's good.
So that was the feeling. So now I'm outside of the Boundary Waters. I'm on some roads I drive a lot and I ride my bike on a lot. I've never portaged them before. So I come off of White Pine Lake and I have this interesting portage. And I've been portaging a lot, and day 11 here of solo trip, hardly seeing anybody else. You get a little funky. And the next one is next slide is a video of a song that I made. Now I did pitch this to Jerry Vander, if anybody knows Jerry. He's a singer songwriter out of Nashville. He writes canoe songs. So if you've never listened to one of the albums, you're going to want to pick them up because they're fantastic. But I pitched him on this song, but he was having nothing of it.
I wish I knew some folk songs, then I could sing to myself. I wish I knew some folk songs, then I could sing to myself. I don't know any folk songs, I don't know any folk.
I don't know. I think this is an award-winning song. He should have just went for it. How about everybody agree? Totally award-winning song.
Folk songs that you could teach me. Do you know any folk songs that you could teach me?
So anyways, we're on to the Poplar River now, and this is kind of an interesting experience for me. So I'm paddling down the river. It's a lot of this flat water, but there's also white water, and it's actually a really nice trip. I would totally paddle this one again. And I ended up staying at a campsite on the Superior Hiking Trail. So I never imagined that I would canoe camp on the Superior Hiking Trail. And this is just outside of the ski hill at Lutsen. This is sunset that day, or this is sunrise the following day, just absolutely beautiful. But what I did wake up to is my boots were completely
last morning
frozen.
Of the trip, it is cold. My boots are a complete solid block of ice. So the only thing I can do is go down to the river and dip them in the warm river water, trying to thaw them out, because there's no way that my feet can get into them right now.
It was cold that night. I had all my clothing on and my 20-degree bag, and it was just cold. Here's what the next day looked like. With a little bit more water, it would have been easier to run this stuff, but the water was low for me. Ended up having to hand over hand and line my canoe all the way down. And I'll admit it, that is a bear bag line that I'm lining my canoe with, just because I didn't want to carry extra heavy ropes for just this short section.
Well, it's all just water under the bridge now.
So the next obstacle was the ski hill. So I come to the ski hill, and the original Ojibwe portage would have went right down the ski hill. And I was actually able to follow it as close as I thought I could. And yes, this is still snow. This is snow from the ski hill at the end of May. You can look over at this is Eagle Mountain that we're looking at, and I'm standing on Moose Mountain if you've ever skied there. After that, I went to the most dangerous part of the trip, and that is the golf course. So as I portaged out of the woods onto the golf course, I must have caught the eyes of some golfers wrong, because I saw the guy shooting and he looked up, and then all of a sudden this golf ball comes right at me. It actually hits my canoe, and I'm like, what the heck? So I yell back at him. Like, I don't know how I thought of this, but it was, I yelled back at him, way to shank the ball, Happy. After, I don't know if anybody's seen that movie, Happy Gilmore, but that's the only thing I could think of. So after I got down the most dangerous part of the entire trip, I was at Lutsen Resort, and here's the canoe at the end of the trip. So if you remember back to the very beginning of the slideshow, I showed you the pristine, unscratched canoe. And after this trip, pretty scratched up. I think probably the majority of that came out of those bushwhacks. So it was definitely a little scratched up on there. So yeah, and that's the trip. So before we take questions, I'm just going to do a little bit more shameless self-promotion here. Is again, this is my stuff. So my website is bryanhansel.com, If you're on Instagram, I'm just at Bryan Hansel. At Mastodon, I'm Bryan Hansel at Mastodon or mstdon.social. Facebook, I'm Bryan_Hansel photography. And then if you want to learn more about what I do, so I teach a lot of photography workshops all over around the country, you can go to bryanhansel.com/workshop. So, and then also, because you're all a bunch of paddlers, paddlinglight.com is my blog. So yeah, so Chris, you wanted do we got some questions?
Great. Why, thank you, Bryan. You know, I'll never complain to the portage gods after seeing what you went through there in your bushwhacking. Boy, I'll tell you, that was really something there, Bryan. Boy, there are a number of questions here. I encourage folks to drop some things in here. But you know, there's kind of an interesting, just a basic question. So how do you know where you're at, you know, in the middle? Do you know, you have your map and you have your compass, but so tell us how you kind of navigated some of the routes there when you're kind of bushwhacking.
Yeah, it was just all maps and compass work. So I just had my map, so I knew which direction I needed to go, and I had my compass. And the way that you do it is if you can see like a tall tree in the distance, you take a bearing off of that, and then that's where you navigate to. And once you're at that spot, then you sort of know, you know, where you're at, and hopefully you're where you think you are, but you just keep on that compass bearing, that heading that's going to get you to the next lake. Because most of the bushwhacking was a point-to-point bushwhack. There wasn't much difficulty. I was going from one lake to the other, so I could just take a bearing on one side. And as long as I stuck relatively close to that bearing, I knew I was going to hit the lake.
Great. Well, we have some folks saying how brave you are to do all that, Bryan here. You know, there were a couple of questions about locations of things, and I don't know if you can go back to your map and show where Bridal Veil and Malman Peak are. Do we have a couple of our guests here that want to know where those are?
Yep. So Bridal Veil is on Gunflint Lake, and that's outside of the boundary water. So you don't need a permit to get to that one. So if you look right here, it says right in the center, it says potential historic portage, and then there's this like little green dot. So this thing right here, I'll just zoom in. It's just right there on Gunflint Lake. And then Malman Peak is on Keck. So it's about halfway down Keck, and it's a difficult one to get to. And I don't recommend attempting that. Like if you want to get that view, there's actually a much easier way to get a very similar view just down the way from a campsite. So there's 2 campsites that have fantastic trails up to great views instead of having to do a dangerous bushwhack. So that's what I would recommend doing, and that's just right there. Now, if you really want to get up to Malman Peak, because you're one of those people that like to find those pins, it's certainly challenging to get up there. I don't know that I'd ever do it again, but it is by far one of the best views that I've had in the boundary water. So, but there's very similar views close by. So
Great. We have a music aficionado out there that wants the name of that canoe folk songwriter again. Jerry, what's Jerry's last name?
Vandiver. I'll put it in the chat.
All right.
Yeah, and then I think his website is just canoesongs.com, maybe something like that. He's a favorite at Canoecopia, so everybody loves to go to him at Canoecopia.
And we have someone that was intrigued by your reference to the Junco River here. Do you have a good route for that river that you?
Yeah, there's no campsites on it. It's kind of an out and back day trip, and you just so you just put in off of Ball Club Road, which is just outside of Grand Marais, so it's kind of north of Grand Marais, and you can't miss it. There's a sign there and everything.
They're kind of going back to Winchell himself here, and the route that he took and the work that he did in 1878 and 1879 here. Now, how did he have any Anishinaabe guides at the time, or what did he use to kind of navigate himself on his journey there?
Yep, he had guides for the trip. So yeah, almost all these early expeditions up here relied on native guides because they lived in the area and this was their homeland and they knew it as good or better than anybody else would have known it. So he had native guides on it. And actually, it's kind of interesting if you go back further to some of the earliest expeditions up here by the Owen expeditions in the 1850s. They were all guided by natives too. So and they collected original native names for locations. So if you're into that kind of stuff, you can find all these old historic lake names and location names, river names that were collected in 1850 and 1879 by Winchell as well. But by 1879, a lot of the lakes the names had changed to European names. So it's surprising how quickly the names have changed, even though that they had native guides. Most of the lakes had English names by that point, or French, English or French names.
Thanks there, Brian. There are some questions about some of the logistics and practicalities of your trip here. And so tell us about your canoe, and the sort of weight of your pack. And maybe there's like 2 or 3 questions in there. Your canoe, your pack, and the weight of your photography equipment as well.
Yeah, so the canoe is a North Star Magic. So it's a 16-footer, about 30 inches wide. It's really fast, but yet maneuverable, and it's super stable in big water. Has a lot of flare in the front, so it sheds water instead of spears through it. So it's a very stable kayak. I think it's one of the better solo tripping canoes. Sorry, I said kayak. It's only solo tripping canoes available on the market. But there's others too, but that just happens to be my favorite. And my boat with the wood gunnels comes in at about 28 pounds. So I don't know how the North Star pulled that off, but it's really amazing to me that you can have wood gunnels on a Kevlar boat and come in at 28 pounds. It's just the technology these days is just unbelievable. And then the paddling gear. So let me just go here. So I did this all with a Cook Custom Sewing pack, big Agnes tent, and all my gear was actually relatively pretty small. I actually talked to Dan after this, trying to get him to make me a smaller pack, because this one is their smallest hybrid portage back, but it's still too big for the gear that I have. Because all the gear I have is relatively lightweight. Let me see if I can find a good picture of the gear. So this is just some of it. So I have a bunch of slides of all the different gear and the food that I took. So this is like a daily food ration that I did. So it's 1.5 pounds per day and about 25 to 2,700 calories. So my breakfast was a granola that I made myself. And this is 600 calories right off the bat for breakfast. All I had to do was add water and eat it out of a bag. And then during the day, because I wasn't stopping much because I was trying to put in big miles with portages and speed, I was eating a lot of bars and stuff so I could eat on the move. And some of I laugh at myself now, but at some points I was eating a bar with one hand and paddling with the other just to keep forward momentum. It's pretty goofy, but I guess it worked. I don't know if it really gave me anything. And then for dinner, I usually did like a Trailtopia, or there was a brand that I really liked that I alternated with this, but it was all vegan food and they went out of business. Unfortunately, they were the best. The one thing that I missed is salt. So all of this, nowadays, all this snack food is like this. They all brag about how low salt they are. And I didn't account for that on a trip where I was sweating a lot of salt. So my most craved after food was this. It was that olives because they were the saltiest thing I had. And so, yeah, but I would eat like this again on a solo trip. It was actually very filling and it was nice. So, water filter was with this Sawyer bottle. I wouldn't do that again. There was actually a filter built into here. It was just a little slow. So then I kept everything a little light. So here's the Winchell journal that I took is that white one. I did bring a Farewell to Arm from Hemingway, thinking that I would reread that book again. I didn't read any of it, so that was a excess weight. And then emergency. Here's my cook kit. Was just really basic because all I was doing is boiling water, so I didn't need much, just boiling water for dinner. Emergency kit with a mirror and lighters and all that, standard kind of stuff. The clothing system that I brought was really lightweight, and this was kind of interesting. So if you look at that piece on the left, that's a new fabric that's called Alpha Direct. That shirt weighs about 5 ounces, and the wind just whips right through it. So it keeps you, it's weird because it keeps you warm, but you don't sweat. It's like it keeps you dry. And if you want to get warmer, then you throw like your rain jacket over top of it, and it's unbelievably warm for 5 ounces. They developed this stuff for the military, and it's called walk to dry. Like the reason that they developed is if somebody fell in the water, they'd be able to walk until they were dry in 10 minutes. So it goes from completely wet to completely dry in 10 minutes just by walking. And altogether, everything that I had on my back in the backpack, all the camping gear came to under 15 pounds. So I think it was like 12 pounds and some odd ounces. Camera gear was the tricky part because camera gear is kind of heavy. And this is what I brought for camera gear. And in the end, I could have probably went a little, this is actually all my electronics I brought. So I brought a GoPro, that's what I shot almost all the video with. Then I brought a Nikon Z7. And what I would do different now is on this trip is I brought 2 lenses. If I were to do a long, fast trip like I did, again, I would just bring a 24 to 120 with me because that's really all I shot with. I wasn't switching lenses very often. But I did have a wide angle lens, like a 14 to 30 with me, and didn't shoot it very much. This is all filters. So if you look up in the upper right-hand corner of that, there's that black bag. That's full of different neutral density filters, and they're split and dark on top and clear on the bottom. And at sunrise and sunset, you put the dark part over the sunrise and sunset over the sky. And that allows you to get that foreground that's visible. Without those, you end up getting a shadowed foreground with a beautiful sky, or you get the foreground that you can see your canoe in, and then the sky is completely blown out in white. I also did carry an inReach with me, which is this thing right there. And what that is a satellite communicator. If you're not familiar with these, it allows you to text in and out. And get weather forecasts. So I was actually using this inReach, and I could get a weather forecast when I wanted it, and it was a point forecast for it, so it was very accurate. And then I was able to check in with my wife when I needed to. So if I wanted to text her, I could text out of the boundary waters using this messaging and get a text back through my cell phone. And then this also sent a ping out to a map every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, my family could check on my location. So my mom really worries about me when I go on trips. And so she likes to see where I'm at and I'm moving. And then I had a couple friends that were following me too. So one of my friends showed up at as I exited the boundary waters, and he knew exactly where I was coming up because he was tracking that. And another friend of mine was watching the webcam on Gunflint Lake for me to paddle past, and he actually screenshotted the Gunflint webcam as I paddled past. So I have a picture of me paddling past the webcam. And he knew that because of the inReach, because he was following me on the inReach. So, and then one of the questions I do get for camera gear a lot is what tripod you use. And this is a Ciru tripod. It weighs 3 pounds with the ball head. So it's a really nice light, and it goes up to chest level, and it's very, very solid. So I think it's the M254 or something like that, model 254. So camera gear came out to about, camera gear and all electronics came out to about 15 pounds. And then the total paddling gear came out to about 35 pounds. That's life vest, canoe, everything. So on a portage with all of my food packed, the maximum amount of weight I did on a single portage was 90 pounds. Which was pretty tough. Of course, that got less, it got lower as I went on because I was eating 1.5 pounds of food per day. So.
Wow, so you are really exacting, keeping track of the weight and making that possible. There was another sort of question related to your equipment about what charger do you use, Brian, to charge your electronics there?
So this is the one that I used on this trip was this one right here. I'll zoom in. It's a RAV power, and it's 20,000 milliamps. It actually was way too much power. I didn't need that much power. because I carry enough batteries for my camera that I don't have to recharge the camera very often. Though I did recharge the GoPro because it goes through batteries like crazy. But 20,000 was probably a little more than I need. And what I would recommend now, if people are looking, is the Nightcore. So Nightcore, the company Nightcore makes a 10,000 milliamp hours power, and it's the lightest one available. It's just maybe 5 ounces, 4 ounces, something like that. It's really light, and it actually comes close. So none of these power banks actually have the amount of power in it that they say they do. They're always short. And the Nightcore is one of the ones that comes closest to 10,000, even though it's lighter. So I think it comes up about 75 as total power that it actually can output.
Wow, thank you so much for the details there. And some people have some questions about some of your upcoming expeditions and workshops and things like that. Maybe you could kind of with a little tell people what things you have, and maybe some workshops they can participate in, and other things that you're doing here.
Yeah, so I do workshops all over the country. So this year, everywhere from Blue Ridge Parkway to Death Valley. Next year, I'm actually keeping things mainly local in the Midwest. So be out in the Black Hills and the Badlands and the North Dakota Badlands, and everything else next year is in Minnesota. So a very local year, and you can find out about my workshops on my webpage. Now I will say that they do fill very, very quickly. So most of them are about 80% of the seats are full for next year already. But I do have some seats available in my winter workshops, which are always the slowest to fill because people don't like to think about winter in the spring when I open things for registration. And actually, that's one of my favorite workshops to do. I think Lake Superior region is a world-class region in winter. And then I do have some seats available on my Night Skies of the Gunflint Trail for next year as well. So that's that is the darkest spot in Minnesota. So we have a Bortle 1, which is as dark as anywhere in the world on the Gunflint Trail. So we go up and we explore that one. And then, so for 2025, my workshops will open for registration in April of 2024. So if people have a specific one they want to get on. And then that year, I'll add some more travel ones back in, and I'll be going back to the Tetons, which I used to do all the time. So that's a popular one.
All right. Why, Bryan, thank you so much for sharing your time, for sharing your inspiration and information here. What a great way to spend lunch with the friends with you, Bryan. We have a lot of hearts in the chat here, and people are really love your presentation. And so thank you to you. Thank you to everyone that was on the part of this lunch with the friends. We're about people, about connecting people to the boundary waters, and all of you are the strength of protecting the boundary waters. So Bryan, heartfelt thank you to you and everyone else on the phone or on the Zoom program here. Thank you to all of you. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.